The other day, my friend called me on the phone and asked me how to start a wildflower garden. She has a place for a garden bed in front of her house, and she wants to grow flowers that will support native bees and other pollinators. She wants to do what's best for wildlife, but she also needs this garden to be aesthetically pleasing enough that her landlord and her more particular neighbors will also still be happy. She needs to keep it pretty low maintenance and low budget as well. So if you have similar goals, I'm going to share my advice as a landscape designer and horticulturist for starting a wildflower garden bed, even if you don't have a ton of gardening experience. There is a lot to learn about this topic. There's so many different methods. There's so many different great ways that people go about doing this, pros and cons to all these methods. But I kept it pretty simple with her on the phone, and that's what I'm going to do in this video for you as well. I hope this video helps you get started. I turned my conversation with my friend and her questions into the outline for this video, like so. And by the way, hello, my name is Eve Hanlon. I'm a landscape designer, I'm a horticulturist, and I'm from the Pacific Northwest corner of the USA. And welcome to Garden Project Academy. I'm creating online courses and resources to help you with your next garden project. So you can subscribe to this channel, check out the resources and other ways you can follow, like my newsletter. That's all in the description below this video, plus a ton of additional resources I'll refer to throughout this video. Check out that description below. There's a lot of good stuff there. Remember that you could live anywhere in the world. Best practices may be slightly different everywhere, and it is always up to you to decide what is best for you and your yard. So let's get started. My friend's first question was, what should I plant? And plant selection is understandably one of the most important aspects of gardening in general. My advice to her was to start with native wildflowers, of course. And if you have gardening experience, you probably already understand that native plants are native to your region. They support native living things, native pollinators, and by planting them, you are helping to restore the ecosystem that was here, thriving for millennia before colonizers and capitalism and all that messed it all up. And they are adapted to your local climate and soil and everything else. That means that they'll be lower maintenance once they are established. I also want to take a second to advocate for the insects that need native plants that aren't as flashy as the pollinators, right? Plants are a part of the whole web of life. Native insects, even the ugly ones that hide under the leaves that we might not notice, often need their familiar plants to survive or complete their life cycle. These insects, the larvae that choose, the decomposers that recycle, the ugly bugs, the tiny bugs, they are important too, and for many reasons. For example, they also feed other things like birds, which feed insects to their young, not just seeds or berries like many think. Everything's connected, and many creatures are displaced because of habitat destruction, and that's why it's so important that you plant native plants. You're helping pollinators, which is great, and you're helping more than just pollinators. But anyway, if you don't know your native wildflowers, how do you find out about them? I'm in the Pacific Northwest USA, but my friend is in Maryland, USA, so the native plants there are different. I didn't know which plants to recommend to her, so we had to do some research. A search online for native wildflowers of Maryland, for example, can bring up a bajillion options, right? So just searching for your native wildflowers is a little bit overwhelming. So let's get a little bit more specific. Start by searching for what to plant. Wildflower Garden Maryland, full sun wildflowers for Garden Maryland, of course substituting wherever you live. Part shade wildflowers to plant Maryland. Try to find resources and plant lists that are more specific to your region, but also specific to gardening. Just because a plant is a native wildflower, right, it does not necessarily mean that it does well in a garden setting. It might not be easy to propagate. You might never be able to find it at a local nursery. So gardening specific lists kind of keep these things in mind a little bit more. Even these lists can still be overwhelming sometimes, so to get even more specific, I recommend looking up native plant nurseries or native plant growers in your area. Of course, these places will have plant lists, and you'll need to get plants or seeds somewhere anyway, so this is getting two things done at once. Some people like to do their entire design based on what is available at a local nursery that they have chosen. A similar hack, we searched for native wildflower seed mixes for Maryland specifically. And even if you don't plan on growing things from seed, this can be a good place to find a list of commonly grown native wildflower possibilities to start researching. Find a seed mix that is very regionally specific. A smaller native plant seed company is going to be better than a big seed company that just slaps Maryland on the packet of random seeds. So just do a vibe check, right? All good seed mixes should include a list of what's in them. They should, and I really don't like when they don't. That's weird to me. But anyway, the list of from a seed mix is a really good starting point. So you have found a few different plant lists. How do you go about narrowing down this overwhelming list of options? First, compare wildflowers that are listed, on multiple lists. Just highlight them because this might be a sign that they're popular or that they grow well or they're commonly available. Maybe they're easy to grow, they're pretty. You never know. There's probably a reason why it keeps coming up. And of course, remember that the principle, right plant, right place, still applies even when you're gardening with native plants. If you're looking at that list from a packet of seeds, most wildflower seed mixes I find are for full sun, but it should say double check. The resources you're looking at should say. There are going to be multiple wildflower options for any environment in your yard. If you have a wetland, if you have full shade, whatever you've got. I actually have a template I designed for choosing the perfect plant for your yard with a list of all the factors to consider plus resources for finding plants. It's all in my free mini course, How to Choose the Perfect Plant. It's linked in the description below this video, and I created this free mini course because this information is so important to gardening success. So just to prevent this video from being way too long, all of that information is already there in that mini course. Check it out. To access it, you just create a username and a password, right, to track your progress as you move through the course, and skim the course if you want. Check out these templates. But in general, this is just how you could proceed to narrow down your plant lists. Search for the specific plant name online. Make sure you like the look of it, you find it pretty and interesting, something that you want to grow first, and then see if it matches your perfect plant checklist and all of the requirements that you need to make sure that you're putting the right plant in the right place. If it has different light requirements, scratch it off the list. If it likes wet soil and your soil is dry, scratch it off the list. And you'll end up with a more narrow list of plant options, and this is great. Less overwhelm. Now you know what you can use in your design. An important aspect of right plant, right place that I want to expand on in this video particularly is the difference between an annual wildflower and a perennial wildflower. In a way, annual wildflower gardens and perennial wildflower gardens have slightly different looks to them. And every plant is going to be different, every ecosystem is going to be different, whatever your local climate is, your native plants are going to be different. So I'm summarizing here, but there is a difference in the look of an annual wildflower garden and a perennial one. So you might want to make your decision based on what your annual wildflower garden is going to look like versus your perennial wildflower garden. Keep in mind that annuals complete their life cycle in 1 year, right? They grow, they go to seed, and then that's it. That's how they reproduce. This is how they naturalize, right? They will produce a ton of seeds, and these seeds are going to find a spot, the right spot where the conditions are right so that they can sprout and grow next year. So this just kind of means that you will need to learn to identify wildflowers when they're young, when you're starting them from seed, and learn the difference between the wildflowers and the weeds that come up in your soil. This is easier to do in the first year, in my opinion, than in the second year, just because the first year you're going to plant the seeds, you'll know where they are, the seeds will come up right where you planted them, so you'll be able to start learning what they look like when they're young. The second year, though, that's when it might be a little bit more tricky, because the wildflower seeds you're not going to plant, they're going to naturalize from last year's plants. They'll come up all around nearby, but you won't know exactly where. So it may be a little bit more tricky to identify which are wildflowers and which are weeds, depending on how much studying you did. And of course, weeds can have very pretty flowers and have tons of amazing uses and benefits, but you don't want weeds to take over your garden. You're going to need to learn this at some point. And for this reason, a perennial garden might be a little bit easier for you. This is what I recommended to my friend too, because perennials I find to be slightly, lower maintenance. You plant an herbaceous perennial once, you know where it is, and it'll return year after year from the same spot, from the same root system. And perennials will still kind of spread and naturalize, and you could also do a mix of both perennials and annuals, but I do find perennials to be lower maintenance, hence my recommendation to my friend. Next, you might be wondering whether you should buy plants or buy seeds and start from seed. Plants can cost more than seeds, but if you're going with a perennial garden, right, this is an investment. You buy these plants, they'll come back year after year. You can propagate from there. You can direct sow a seed mix that contains seeds to both annual plants and perennial plants, but then, based on what comes up, you might have a more random look. And of course, you can move things around, but if you plant the perennials, you can plan out exactly where things are going to be. In general, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's up to you. For my friend, because she needs her garden to have a certain neatness to it right away that will appease her, her landlord and her more particular neighbors, I recommended that she start with the perennial plants so that she can plan out a design, and then right from the start, these plants will be in, a very neat looking arrangement. She can make this design, put the plants in certain spaces in a way that looks neat, and mulch around the perennials that she plants. Then the garden is done, and it can return next year a little bit more filled in. Pretty low maintenance and pretty neat looking. And the other ways aren't wrong. This is just what I recommended to her. There's so many great ways to do this. You could also grow all your own perennials from seed instead of buying perennial plants, right? Or you could do a mix of everything. You could try everything. It's all so much fun. For her, she's probably just going to go to a plant nursery, see what perennials they have available, native perennial wildflowers they have available, make her design based on those things, buy some plants, plant them, and just be done. That leads to our next question. Where do you buy these plants or these seeds? You can find local native plant nurseries online. You can visit them in person and shop. You can order plants online. You can order seeds online. You could carefully and respectfully collect seeds from native plants in natural spaces and grow them yourself. You could take small cuttings or propagate from native plants very carefully and respectfully. Again, please don't go out and destroy natural spaces for your garden. Propagate from native plants in friends' yard. Ask them what they have and if they are willing to share some cuttings or divisions. And then you could go to your local nursery, plant nursery, garden center, see what they carry. And sometimes, like even grocery stores or like home improvement stores in their garden center, they will have a few native plants. Not always. Hopefully they do. And if they don't, consider just like, putting in some feedback like, hey, can you start carrying these things? Because it's a really good thing that every place should be carrying in general. Anyway, I do recommend going to the nurseries, learning what's available, and then going home to make your designer plan based on what you find, then go back and buy the plants. And I know that sounds overkill. It sounds like there's an extra step in there. Is there a more efficient way to do this? Well, number one, I just find it's hard to plan and research and design and shop all at once. And if you make your design before you learn what your local nurseries have available, you might end up just, looking everywhere for the plants that you want in your design. So sometimes I personally believe the most efficient way is to go see what your nurseries have available, go home, make a plan, make a design, do that research, and then return to the nurseries to purchase those plants. To make your yard look nice for your landlord or your neighbors, if more picky people, while still doing a great thing for pollinators and other living creatures, consider spacing plants carefully, right? Perhaps so they overlap slightly at maturity, so they fill in the space but not too densely. Consider a little bit of symmetry if, maybe you're planting in front of a house, but just be careful with symmetry. Don't do too much. So, it is a natural space. If a plant were to die, you don't want things to look too uneven. So I like to say a little bit of symmetry is good. There is a such thing as too much. Tall plants in the back, shorter plants in the front. I'd like to recommend you plant in odd numbers, like in 3s and 5s, and space plants out, kind of to create cohesion. Or you could create like swaths of plants that will then grow together to have a more naturalized look. Consider also adding a few evergreen plants into the design so that you have a nice look in the winter. A lot of herbaceous perennials will go dormant in the winter. They'll die completely to the ground and then they'll start regrowing in the spring. But there are semi-evergreen herbaceous perennials that will have some things that will stay, green all year. You could also add a couple of bushes, right? Some evergreen shrubs, other evergreen plants. Try to stick with native whenever possible. But if you wanted to add a few little evergreen things in there, just so it looks nice in the winter, you might want to consider that. Now, preparing the soil. So you'll need to remove any lawn or weeds beforehand, clear out the area. And if you have at least 6 months before planting time, like if it's fall, for example, you want to plant in the spring, consider smothering out the weeds or lawn by layering your soil amendments on top and then mulching deeply. And I personally do use cardboard under mulch when smothering. And again, that's when smothering. But I never use cardboard when I'm mulching around plants because I want to keep the plants happy. But and more on that in another video sometime maybe. But if you have the time, I do find that to be a helpful method to smother out an existing lawn or weeds. Otherwise, you could simply grab that shovel and dig out the grass, dig out the weeds, turn the soil a bit to decrease compaction if needed, and you can turn in some soil amendments like compost. Of course, native plants are adapted to native soils, so this may not be necessary, but depending on how your house was constructed, you might not actually have like really nice soil you could have fill soil, for example. It might have been soil that came from really deep underground. It could have been really compacted. So sometimes it is a good thing, even when you're planting native gardens, to amend your soil or decrease compaction. If I were a perfect landscape designer, I'd say that at this point, it is critical that you get a soil test done by sending a soil test into a soil testing lab. It's easy to do, and since not all gardens need compost, right? As amazing as compost is, you should send this soil test in and learn what you're working with and what it needs. But it turns out I'm not a perfect landscape designer because I just recommended to my friend that she add an inch or two of compost and not sweat it too much. Just turn that in there a little bit. You don't have to turn compost in. Soil Life will work it down in. But if you want to speed things up a little bit, you could turn it in a little. Just to keep things simple, get this done this weekend. Just add some compost, a couple of inches. Whatever you choose to do, mulch is the next step, and it is very important, and you should mulch a few inches deep with an organic material, like something woody or barky or husky or tree needly, you get the idea, and do it right away, right after turning the soil, because when you mix up the soil, bring new soil to the surface, weed seeds that have been living in the soil for a very long time are very likely to start germinating right away. So mulch as soon as possible after turning the soil. And you can watch my other mulch videos to learn more about why mulch is so important. Get more specific on what materials and how deep and when and where. It's all linked in the description below this video. Some people will mulch and then plant into the mulch. Some people will plant and then mulch around those plants. Either way, it's up to you. Both ways will work. If you're planting into mulch, just make sure you don't mix, when you're planting, scooch the mulch away and then plant into the space, then put the mulch back. Because you don't want to mix the soil and the mulch up too much, because then weed seeds will germinate in that soil. You're not getting the weed prevention benefits from the mulch anymore. Just the most important thing is to mulch right away. And mulch deeply enough too. That could be 2 to 3 inches of mulch. It depends on the material. Sometimes even more, up to 5, 6 inches. And of course, when you mulch deeply, you want to taper down toward your plants. You don't want to bury your plants in mulch. And again, for more specifics about how deep based on the material, check out my other mulch videos. Now let's talk about water. Even well-adapted, drought-tolerant native plants will need water for the first growing season or the first few growing seasons, depending on your climate. And this is because they need to establish deep roots. Water deeply and frequently, and you can figure out how frequently you need to water your plants by very, very carefully seeing how long it takes for them to just start wilting. This can kind of set the pace so that you can water frequently enough that they don't wilt, but then, as infrequently as possible. By watering deeply and infrequently, that encourages the roots to grow down. If you were to just water a little bit every now and then, right, these plant roots would grow closer to the surface, just expecting that water to return. So I guess it's like you're training them to be tough and grow really deep roots while you're still looking out for them. In general, if you are new to this, be sure to start small. Dream big, but start small. Plan to add new beds in phases, right? Make sure each phase looks good on its own. If you were to stop at that phase and then expand, add additional beds, expand on these beds later on. See how it feels to install and maintain a small bed, and then you'll be better able to gauge how much you want to add. And evolve your design as you learn. You're probably going to learn what plants do better than others. Some might be more likely to naturalize and fill in space. Some might be more polite, or some might not grow well at all. You're going to evolve your design as you learn things. So that's another reason why it's good to start small and then grow in phases. You can learn from your past mistakes. It's all a learning experience, right? And then every expansion from there will be based off of that new knowledge. So we've covered a ton of information in this video, and a lot of these topics I really did simplify. I understand that best practices are going to be different everywhere depending on where you live, but I did want to simplify this enough that it makes you feel confident to go out and just get started. If you have any advice for someone, maybe you're someone who has already started a wildflower garden, maybe you have a lot of experience. If you have any advice, please share it in the comments below. Again, check out, I've got videos about mulch. I've got the free mini course, How to Choose the Perfect Plant. All of that is linked in the description below this video. And if you want to see more landscape design and gardening content like this, subscribe to this Garden Project Academy channel. Thank you so much for watching, and happy gardening.